riots and escapes. We'll start with riots. Riots result from two factors. The first factor is what we call the environmental factors. Can be weather. Right? 100-degree heat. Riots typically occur in hot weather rather than cold weather. For whatever reason, people don't want to riot when there's snow on the ground. You can probably figure that one out. But hot weather makes people cranky, yes? And then when things are already crappy, and then they're cranky on top of it from the heat, because our correctional facilities are not air conditioned, well, you can understand how that could happen. And then you add to that, maybe, you got a bunch of other stuff going on, overcrowding. You got too many people in too little space, and they're all on each other's nerves. Poor food. If you look at just about any riot that has ever occurred anywhere, almost always the quality of the food is a major complaint. We go back to the importance of food. The two most prevalent drives for a human being, for sex and for food. And if you can't have sex, then food assumes a magnified importance. And if we feed them poorly, there's going to be pushback, I can guarantee it. One of the reasons we talked about the difference between jail and prison food, jails can get away with serving really bad food, and they don't have riots because it's short term. But if you serve bad food in prison, you are going to have a problem, mark my words. So when I hear people say, well, prisoners shouldn't have ham on Easter Sunday, that's just wrong. No, it's not. Give them ham. Well, they shouldn't have roast at Christmas. Yes, they should. Because it's a lot cheaper to serve them roast than it is to clean up an entire facility after a riot. Yes, feed them well. Please, take my tax dollars. Poor medical care. Now, we'll talk about this more in prisoners' rights, and this has become less of a problem, but it can still be a problem. Right? Because, you know, they're convicts, and we just don't want to spend the money. And while we meet the minimum standards for medical care, you know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we won't do, like microsurgeries in somebody's face. Or if somebody's got a bad tooth, we're not going to fill that tooth unless they want to pay for it. We'll just pull it out. So what you see over a course of time is long-term offenders, people who are doing life and don't have any money. They get kind of gummy looking, you know, because they have so many teeth missing over the course of time. The tooth goes bad, they can't afford to get it filled, so it gets pulled. So, you know, towards the end of their life there, they've only got a few teeth left. Environmental factors. So you factor all of this in together, and usually it's multiple factors. And then you've got what we call a precipitating event. The thing that sets it off, and it's almost always some stupid little thing. What we call the spark in the haystack, or what my mother used to refer to as the straw that broke the camel's back. That one last little thing that just tips the scale. Right? It's been piling up, it's been piling up, it's been piling up, and all of a sudden, just that little push, and boom. Because riots, as it turns out, are almost never planned. The pressure has been building and building and building, and then one stupid little thing sets it off. Let's look at some riots in Michigan. So the State Prison of Southern Michigan, called SPSM. See that picture? Isn't that phenomenal? I haven't been down there since they tore it all up, but I'm told they actually restructured the whole thing. But it was at one point in time the largest walled prison in the entire world. And you can see how really frightening that looks. Reception and guidance that we talked about in our last lecture is right there. You see that little area around the curved driveway right in the front? That's reception and guidance, and the reception and guidance unit is in one of those areas there. Now what they have gone and done since is, you know, sectioned it all off and broken it up, and so it's not just this giant huge prison anymore, but it was for a really long time. And it held thousands of men. So we've got the 1952 riot. You guys saw the video on that. It was notable. It was one of the largest that we've had in Michigan. And then, more recently, we had the 1981 riot. Now this one was pretty big, and I've had the honor of knowing several people who were in their careers during the 1981 riot. Mr. Dale Suter, who he's retired from us now, but he was one of our adjuncts, and he was actually working as a CO at the Jackson prison during that riot. So, I mean, he can tell you some stories, right? And Maria Gazar, the recruiter from Department of Corrections who will be coming to visit us, was working at, where was she? Riverside Correctional Facility, which was across the river from Michigan Reformatory, where another riot sparked. Okay, because here's what happened. This particular riot, news of it carried, and in the same week, Marquette Branch, which was one of our other largest prisons, and Michigan Reformatory, which was one of our other largest prisons, both decided to riot at the same time. So in 1 week, we've got 3 of our major prisons in this state in riot conditions. You can see how that's kind of notable. Now Maria, sometimes I can get her to tell stories and sometimes I can't. So over the course of time that she's been coming in and talking to us about recruitment at Michigan Department of Corrections, I've gotten a variety of different stories out of her. The particular story that she tells, she was a brand new recruit. I mean, she had just hired in, she's like 19 years old. And it was at a time before they allowed women to actually work in the prisons with males. So women could only work in perimeter positions or at the front desk at the time. So she's up in a watchtower outside of Riverside Correctional Facility. And she can see over the river and over the hill, Michigan Reformatory in flames. And the injured offenders, because Michigan Reformatory at the time was for our youngest offenders. So, you know, your 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds. That's where they kept the under 21s. So they're young. And Maria's young. And she said it was a pretty powerful thing for her to stand up there in that tower and watch them bringing the injured kids, prisoners, in from Michigan Reformatory for medical treatment at Riverside. Bringing these young guys in on gurneys, you know, people her own age, and she's looking down, she's watching the whole thing. She said it was horrifying. One time on a prison tour, back when I taught the prison tour class, we went down to Michigan Reformatory. This is a really long time ago, and they've remodeled it since then, and I'm not sure what it looks like now. But back then, it was an old prison. It was built in the 1870s, and it looked every part of it. And the tour guide we got he was a white shirt at the time that we got him as a tour guide, but he had been at Michigan Reformatory during the riot as a young officer too. And when he mentioned that, I said, wow, that's pretty powerful stuff. Could you share some stories? And he got a really funny look on his face, and he just shut right down. And he said, no. But he did take us through a unit that had housed prisoners at the time of the riot and no longer housed prisoners. Now, when he took us through this unit, I'm going to tell you, I can tell you, because of the conditions of confinement, I can tell you why those prisoners wanted to riot. I mean, it was horrible. It was one of those, it was bars and concrete. Okay, let me draw you a picture here of the unit. And it was one long, single level housing unit, okay? And so right here are your side-by-side cells. And I think you said they had 1 or 2 men, and I'm not sure which. And then there was another set of outer bars here. So what you have here is basically a catwalk in front of these individual cells. And then a row of bars here, and then this was the open range where the officers would patrol. Okay, now this is all concrete. Concrete and steel. There's a radiator here. There's a radiator here. And there's a radiator here. Can you imagine heating that unit in the wintertime? I gotta guess it probably never made it over 50 degrees in there if they were lucky. And it was in terrible shape. And he said after the riot they just closed it down. And we're walking through that. I'm looking at this. I'm like, I'd riot too. I can see why they rioted. But you can't treat people like animals and expect them not to behave that way. You just can't. And that's a lot of what we were doing here. Okay, so in 1981, we did a 180. Right, the late 70s, early 80s were a really transitional time for corrections. In 1981, in the wake of these riots, they launched a major investigation as to the cause of the riot. And what they came up with was a couple of things: very poor living conditions and untrained, uneducated officers. So this was the beginning of what we know now as really quality training, some of the best training in the entire nation for corrections officers. This is when the educational requirements were instituted. And this is when the academy got ramped up to something that was serious and notable. And that's where it came from, was the backlash of the riot, and that's a good thing. Other infamous riots. Attica, New York, 1971. This is widely considered to be the single worst riot in United States prison history. There were 32 inmates and 11 officer hostages killed. I can't remember how many officer hostages they took. I don't know, 40, 50, maybe more than that. But 11 were killed. 32 inmates were killed. Now, a few of them got killed by other inmates, but not very many. And the same with the officer hostages. Only one officer was killed by inmates. Most of those people died in the retaking of the prison by friendly fire. Most of them died from friendly fire. So that was a very painful lesson for corrections. And one we didn't really learn very well because we had some rather significant riots after that as well. Now this is Don Alameter. He's a surviving Attica hostage, and I had the distinct honor of meeting him when I was at a conference for the American Correctional Association down in Tampa a few years ago. And he and another surviving hostage actually gave a little workshop talking about their experiences and everything. And it was an early morning workshop, so there weren't a lot of people there. Nobody wants to get up early, I guess. So I saw him later in the big exposition hall where he was manning a booth for the Correctional Peace Officers Foundation. And he recognized me, and we started talking. And you know, we kind of bonded a little bit. We talked for about 45 minutes there. And I'm still in touch with him. Every once in a while I shoot him an email and get one back. But I'm still in touch with him. And you know, one of the things that I wondered is, you know, gosh, after a situation like that, you know, what did you do? How did it affect your career? And he said, well, you know, I mean, I had a lot of nightmares. He said, I still have some sometimes. He said, but, you know, back in those days, you just went back to work. And that's what I did. So he and the majority of his colleagues who had been taken hostage, they just went back to work, business as usual. And he finished his career. He gave me a challenge coin. I probably shouldn't be telling you this because I'm not supposed to be telling anybody about this. A challenge coin is a specially minted coin that we use a lot in law enforcement, corrections, and the military to represent a specific group or facility or something like that. And he had this challenge coin. So we're talking, and he pulls me aside. He says, hang on, I got something for you. And he presses something into my hand. He says, put that in your pocket real fast. So I did, you know, without looking at it. I says, what is it? He says, it's a challenge coin. He says, there are only a handful of them made. And I'm not supposed to be giving them out. But I think you need this. He said it represents the forgotten victims of the Attica prison riot. So on the front, on its face, it says Attica State Prison. You can see the front of Attica. You can see the helicopter flying over it. There are the dates of the riot, and this was a 40th anniversary challenge coin that was minted. And on the back, each of the red stars represents a fallen hostage. Isn't that a cool thing to be given? Yeah, powerful stuff. I think on e-learning I've included under videos of interest a video of him and his colleague talking about their experiences as hostages in Attica. So if you want to go back on there and watch that, it's pretty cool. Other infamous riots, Santa Fe, New Mexico. You watched that one. Considered to be the second worst prison riot in U.S. history, primarily because of the brutality that was used. Now, no officer hostages were killed, but they were pretty severely traumatized. Santa Fe operated on a snitch system to get information about other inmates. And in corrections parlance, of course, you know, we say snitches get stitches. So these snitches were kept in a separate part of the facility. When the riot broke out, they went after the snitches. Right? An execution squad comprised primarily of lifers who really had nothing to lose. They went after those snitches. And they used cutting torches to cut their way through the bars into these cells and extract these snitches, and then they went freaking medieval on them. They burned some of them alive with blowtorches. They cut others up with meat cleavers, hatchets. I mean, they pulled them apart, screwdrivers, pliers, all of that kind of stuff. So the reason that it's considered to be the second most serious riot in American history was just the sheer brutality. Atlanta, Georgia, 1987. This was primarily as a result of the Mariel Cuban detainees of the 1980s. Most of you probably don't remember that. But in the early 1980s, Fidel Castro, the dictator of Cuba, decided that he wanted to get rid of some of his riffraff and some of his low-class people, if you will. So he took the worst of the worst from his jails, prisons, and mental institutions and put them on boats and, kicked them out into the Straits of Florida, right, the waterway between Cuba and Florida. Now, some of them died, some of them were intercepted by the U.S. Coast Guard, and some of them made landfall. The ones who made landfall were like, crap, what do we do with them? We don't want them as citizens because they're undesirables in Cuba. We sure as hell don't want them as citizens. So, it's not like they're going to get citizenship or asylum or anything. They're criminals. They're severely mentally ill people. What do we do with them? So we didn't know what to do with them. We threw them in a prison. And after sitting in that prison for a number of years, they decided they didn't like it so much anymore. And they rioted. And there you go. I mean, you can see quite a lot of damage was done there. The next one I'm going to jump to is there have been plenty of them. There's been a lot of prison riots around the country. I'm going to jump to Lucasville because I personally remember this one. I was on the job then. And Lucasville, Ohio, isn't really that far from Michigan, right? And that's what scared us, was the proximity. How close this was to us. And everybody, I swear probably every correctional officer in the state of Michigan, whether they worked in a jail or a prison, was walking on eggshells that whole week. It was an 11-day riot that kicked off on an Easter Sunday. And it was over the usual stuff. Ohio, I'm going to be honest with you, at least back in the day, was not really very well known for its good prison conditions or its good working conditions. So the prisoners rioted. Now, in a riot, especially since Attica, there are two general philosophies, okay? There's take the prison back by force, and there's negotiate. But what's important is when you do these things, see? Because the common sense approach says, and we learned this in Attica, if you can get your SWAT team, your CERT team, whatever you want to call them, if you can get them in immediately after the riot starts, and use force and take your prison back, that is what you should do. before the prisoners get organized, before they get dug in, before they develop a plan. If you can get in there fast and take your prison back by force, that's what you should do. And that's what they were going to do in Attica. But, you know, it was the late 60s, early 70s, and everybody's kumbaya, touchy-feely, holdy hands. And the touchy-feely, holdy hands people said, well, now, let's not do that. They have legitimate demands, and they did. And we should just talk to them. So they delayed. And the prisoners got dug in. They developed a plan. They had leaders. They made weapons. Now, all we've got is negotiation. And we weren't very good at it back then. So in the end, they try to take the prison back by force, and, you know, you get what you got. You got a bunch of dead people. So we learned our lesson there. We thought. Except the same thing happened in Lucasville. The riot sparked, and instead of going in like they should have and taking the prison back, they dilly-dallied around and waited. And the prisoners got organized. They made a plan. They got dug in. So now all that leaves is negotiation. The problem is, if you're going to negotiate and be successful, you have to negotiate in what we call good faith. That means what you say, you mean. Right? Say what you mean what you say. Be fair, play above board, keep your promises. Well, it didn't take the prisoners too long to figure out, yeah, they're jacking us around. They're making us a whole bunch of empty frou-frou promises that they're never going to carry through with. And the prisoners finally told them, look, you know, we're tired of being jacked around. Don't do it anymore. You know, either negotiate with us or don't. And if you don't get serious about your negotiations, we're going to start killing hostages. That's how it's going to be. So the administration jacks them around some more. The prisoners are like, oh, is that how it's going to be? Well, then we're going to make good on our word. And so they killed a hostage. They murdered corrections officer Robert Vallandigham. Now here's the thing. TV would have you believing that corrections is stranger policing. You know, prisoner 865731. But it's not like that. We know each other. Like we talked about in here, if we were together every single day, 8 hours, 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week over the course of years, we'd all know each other really well. Yes, ma'am?
I believe in the Santa Fe one, they literally like brought like an injured officer like to the gate so he could like get help.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, these are people we know. So they've got these hostages all together, and, you know, they've got to decide who they're going to kill. And they picked Robert Vallandigham. Now, they didn't say, Officer Vallandigham, come with us. CO, come with us now. When they took him to another room to kill him, they said, we're sorry, Bobby. We're sorry it has to be this way. Right, Bobby. This is not stranger policing. And they killed that man. And then they said, come and get him. Now, you either want to straighten up and fly right with us, negotiate in good faith, or we'll keep doing this. So then the administration said, oh, they're serious. I guess we better negotiate in good faith. And they were eventually able to bring that riot to a close. But you see the issue here, right?